The wind howled through the canyon like a wounded animal, carrying with it a wall of sand that scraped against the weathered boards of Clara Whitmore's small house. She pressed her palm against the kitchen window, watching the storm clouds gather over the abandoned mines that dotted the hills surrounding Mercy's Hollow. Another dust storm was coming, the third this month. Clara stepped back from the window and checked the locks on the front door. Once, twice, then a third time for certainty. The brass bolt was solid beneath her fingers, cold and reassuring. She had installed it herself 6 months ago, along with the one on the back door and the heavy iron bar across her bedroom door. Some might call it excessive. Clara called it necessary. The house creaked under the assault of the wind, its bones protesting against the elements. It wasn't much, just 4 rooms cobbled together from salvaged lumber and determination. But it was hers. Walter had left her that much, at least. The rest of what he'd left her couldn't be fixed with nails and determination. She moved through her evening routine with practiced efficiency, checking the windows, securing the shutters, filling the water pitcher from the barrel in the corner. Her movements were precise, economical. Living alone this far from town meant planning ahead. The general store was a half-day's ride, and Clara made the journey only when absolutely necessary. The fewer people she saw, the fewer questions she had to dodge. As she lit the kerosene lamp, its warm glow pushed back the gathering darkness. The Colt revolver on the table caught the light, its metal surface gleaming dully. She kept it loaded, always within reach, another necessity. The wind picked up, rattling the shutters with increasing violence. Clara set about preparing her simple supper, beans and hardtack, same as most nights. She had learned to find comfort in routine, in the predictability of her solitary existence. No surprises meant no danger. She was halfway through her meal when the sound came, a heavy thud against the front door that was decidedly not the wind. Clara froze, her hand moving instinctively to the revolver. Another thud, followed by what might have been a groan. "Help!" The word was barely audible above the storm, but unmistakably human. Male. Clara's grip tightened on the gun. She remained seated, watching the door as if it might burst open of its own accord. Men who appeared at isolated houses during storms rarely brought good news. The pounding came again, weaker this time. "Please, the storm!" She rose slowly, keeping the table between herself and the door. Through the gap beneath it, she could see a shadow. Someone had collapsed against her threshold. Clara weighed her options. Turn him away and let the desert claim him, or risk opening her door to a stranger. Neither choice sat well with what remained of her conscience. Moving carefully, she approached the door. "State your business," she called out, loud enough to be heard over the wind. "Name's Vane," came the reply, rough and labored. "Elias Vane, horse through me, caught in the storm. Just need shelter till it passes." Clara hesitated. The name meant nothing to her, which was both good and bad. She peered through the small window beside the door. In the dim light, she could make out a figure slumped against her doorframe, tall, broad-shouldered, covered in dust. His horse was nowhere to be seen. "You armed?" she asked. A pause. "Rifle's with my horse, wherever that is now. Stand up and step back from the door. Hands where I can see them." She watched through the window as the man struggled to comply, using the door frame to pull himself upright. He staggered back several paces, swaying slightly, his hands raised despite the obvious effort it cost him. Blood darkened one sleeve of his coat. Clara drew back the bolt and opened the door just wide enough to get a better look. The man, Vane, stood in the swirling dust, his face obscured by the storm and the brim of his hat. What she could see didn't immediately threaten. Weather-worn clothes, a slight limp, that bloodied arm hanging awkwardly at his side. "The shed out back," she said, gesturing with the revolver. "You can wait out the storm there. There's horse blankets and a water barrel." He nodded, started to turn, then stumbled. His knee hit the ground hard, and he struggled to rise again. Clara watched his failed attempt to stand, saw the way he cradled his injured arm. The storm was worsening, the temperature dropping as night fell properly. The shed would be cold. And if he was badly hurt, damn it all, she muttered. Get inside, quickly. He looked up at her, and in the lamplight from her doorway, she caught her first real glimpse of his face. Weathered but not old, maybe 35, 40 at most. Dark hair fell across his forehead, and his eyes, when they met hers, were the color of desert sage. There was pain there, but something else too. Relief, maybe, or resignation. Clara stepped aside, keeping the gun trained on him as he pulled himself upright and staggered through her door. She shut it quickly behind him, throwing the bolt back into place. The sudden absence of wind made the small room feel even smaller. The chair by the stove, she said, indicating with the barrel of her gun. Sit, don't move unless I tell you to. He complied without protest, sinking into the wooden chair with obvious relief. Up close, she could see the extent of his condition. Dust caked every surface, turning his dark hair gray. The blood on his sleeve had spread, and a gash on his forehead leaked a thin red line down his temple. His clothes, while worn, were of decent quality, not a drifter's rags, but not a gentleman's finery either. That arm needs tending, she said, her practical nature overriding her caution momentarily. I'd be obliged, he replied, his voice low and measured despite his condition. Though I understand if you'd prefer I tend it myself. Clara studied him for a moment. He hadn't looked around the room, hadn't assessed her possessions or tested her boundaries. His hands remained visible on his knees, his posture carefully non-threatening despite his size. Either he was very clever or genuinely just seeking shelter. She moved to the shelf where she kept her medical supplies, bandages torn from old sheets, a bottle of whiskey for cleaning wounds, needle and thread. All the while, she kept him in her peripheral vision, the gun never far from reach. Remove your coat, she instructed. Slowly. He complied, wincing as he worked the garment off his injured arm. Beneath it, his shirt was torn and bloody. The wound looked like a deep gash rather than a bullet hole, consistent with his story about being thrown from a horse. Clara set the supplies on the table and stepped back. Clean it and wrap it. The whiskey's for the wound, not for drinking. A ghost of a smile crossed his features. Yes, ma'am. She watched as he worked, noting the steadiness of his hands despite the pain he must have been feeling. He was methodical, thorough, not the rushed job of someone eager to move on quickly. When he was finished, she handed him a cup of water, careful to maintain her distance. Thank you, he said simply, for the shelter and the doctoring. You'll sleep in the barn, Clara said, ignoring his gratitude. Soon as the storm passes, you'll be on your way. Understood. The wind continued its assault on the house, and through the window. Clara could see nothing but a wall of dust and darkness. The storm would last through the night at least. She gathered a horse blanket and a canteen, setting them by the door. There's a lantern in the barn, matches on the shelf by the door. Don't light any fires, the hay's too dry. Come morning, you go. He stood carefully, testing his balance. I'm grateful, Mrs. Whitmore, she said, then wondered why she'd given him even that much. Mrs. Whitmore. He touched the brim of his hat, a gentleman's gesture that seemed at odds with his rough appearance. I'll be no trouble. Clara led him to the back door, gun still in hand. The barn stood 20 yards from the house, barely visible through the storm. She watched him make his way across, bent against the wind, until he disappeared inside. Only then did she close and bolt the door. Back in her kitchen, she extinguished the lamp and moved to her bedroom. The familiar weight of the iron bar settled across the door brackets with a solid thud. She placed the revolver on the nightstand within easy reach and lay fully clothed on top of the covers. Sleep wouldn't come easily tonight. It rarely did when there were strangers about. Clara stared at the ceiling, listening to the storm and thinking about the man in her barn, Elias Vane. The name still meant nothing, but that didn't mean he was harmless. She had learned the hard way that danger often wore a pleasant face. Through her small window, she could just make out the faint glow of the lantern in the barn. He had found it. Then, she wondered what had really happened to his horse. Why he had been traveling alone through a storm. The desert was full of men running from something. Debts, crimes, memories. Which was he? Clara touched the scar on her collarbone, hidden beneath the high neck of her dress. Some wounds were visible. Others, the ones that cut deepest, left marks only on the inside. Walter had taught her that lesson well. The storm raged on, and somewhere in her barn, a stranger waited for morning. Clara closed her eyes and began counting, a trick she'd learned to quiet her racing thoughts. But tonight, the numbers couldn't quite drown out the knowledge that for the first time in 6 months, she wasn't alone on her small patch of desert. And despite every hard-learned instinct screaming warnings, despite the locks and the loaded gun and the promise she'd made to herself to never again be vulnerable to a man's whims, some small, treacherous part of her was glad for the company, even if it was only temporary, even if it came with danger. The wind howled louder, as if in mockery of her weakness. Clara pulled the blanket up to her chin and kept counting, waiting for dawn and the departure of Elias Vane. The morning sun revealed the storm's aftermath, sand piled against the house like snowdrifts, fence posts leaning at drunken angles, and Clara's vegetable garden buried beneath a layer of dust. She stood on her porch, surveying the damage with resigned acceptance. This was life at the edge of the desert. The barn door stood open, and she could see Elias Vane working inside, his shirt sleeves rolled up despite the morning chill. He had already mucked out the empty stalls and was now examining the sagging roof beam that had worried Clara for months. "Morning, Mrs. Whitmore," he called out, not turning from his inspection. "Hope you don't mind. Noticed this beam was about to give way. Storm didn't help matters any." Clara's hand went instinctively to the revolver tucked in her apron pocket. "I said you were to leave come morning." He turned then, and in the daylight she could see him more clearly. The gash on his forehead had scabbed over, and his injured arm was properly bandaged. His face was weathered but honest, with crow's feet that suggested he smiled more than scowled. "I'd be a poor guest to leave you with a barn about to collapse," he said. "I've got some skill with carpentry. Let me shore it up before I go. Payment for your hospitality." Clara hesitated. The beam did need fixing, had needed it since before Walter died. But accepting help meant extending his stay, and that went against every rule she'd made for herself. "I can't pay you," she said stiffly. Didn't ask for pay, just offering to return a kindness. She watched him for a long moment, weighing risks against practicality. The barn was essential for storing feed and supplies. If it collapsed, she'd be in real trouble come winter. "Just the beam," she said finally. "Then you go." He touched his hat brim in acknowledgement and returned to his assessment. Clara retreated to the house, but found herself drawn to the kitchen window that overlooked the barn. She told herself she was keeping watch, ensuring he didn't steal anything, but there was something else, a curiosity she hadn't felt in a long time. Elias worked with economy and precision, measuring twice before cutting once with the saw he'd found among Walter's old tools. By noon, he had fashioned a support brace from scrap lumber and was working it into place. Clara brought him water, leaving it on a stump outside the barn rather than approaching directly, and he thanked her with that same quiet courtesy that seemed so at odds with his rough appearance. The beam was secured by late afternoon, stronger than it had been in years. But Elias didn't stop there. He repaired the loose boards on the barn door, patched a hole in the roof where the rain had been getting in, and reinforced the chicken coop that the storm had nearly demolished. Clara watched it all from various windows, her vigilance gradually giving way to something like appreciation. It had been so long since anything in her small domain had been improved rather than merely maintained. She found herself noticing the way he worked, methodical but not slow, careful but not hesitant. His injured arm seemed to give him little trouble. As the sun began its descent toward the western hills, she made a decision that surprised her. She prepared 2 plates of supper instead of 1. "Mr. "Vane," she called from the porch. "Supper's ready." He looked up from where he was organizing Walter's tools, something she hadn't been able to bring herself to do. "That's kind of you, ma'am, but I don't want to impose further. You've done a day's work. Least I can do is feed you before you go." He washed his hands and face at the pump, then approached the house with that same careful respect for boundaries he'd shown from the start. Clara had set his plate at the far end of the table, keeping her revolver visible on the sideboard. They ate in silence at first. The only sounds the clink of forks on tin plates and the whisper of wind through the gaps in the walls. "You've got a good piece of land here," he said eventually. "Water rights from the stream, decent soil when the desert lets it be. It serves," Clara replied, not inviting further conversation. But something in her silence must have seemed less forbidding, because he continued. "I passed through Mercy's Hollow yesterday. Town seems to be struggling since the mines played out. People move on. It's the way of things. You didn't—" Clara's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "This is my home." "Yes, ma'am, I can see that." His tone held no judgment, just observation. "House shows good care. Garden, too, under all that sand. Takes determination to keep a place like this." She didn't respond, but she found herself studying him across the table. His hands were calloused but clean. His table manners better than most men who passed through these parts. There was an education in his speech, though he tried to hide it. "Where are you headed, Mr. Vane?" The question surprised her as much as it seemed to surprise him. "West, eventually. California. Maybe. Heard there's work in the lumber camps. Long way to California." "Yes, ma'am. But sometimes a long way is what's needed." Their eyes met across the table, and Clara saw something there she recognized. The shadow of old pain. The weight of unspoken history. She looked away first, pushing back from the table. "Sun's nearly down. You'd best be moving on if you're going to make any distance before dark." He stood as well, reaching for his hat. "About that, Mrs. Whitmore, my horse is still missing. Likely dead in some canyon. I know you've been more than generous already, but I wonder if I might impose on your hospitality for one more night. I'll be gone at first light, and I'll split more wood for your trouble." Clara knew she should refuse. Every instinct Walter had beaten into her screamed against it. But the woodpile was dangerously low, and town was indeed a half-day's ride without a horse. "The barn," she said tersely. "One more night, but you'll split enough wood to last a month." "Yes, ma'am. Thank you." As he turned to go, she noticed him favoring his left leg slightly, an injury he'd hidden all day while working. Pride or practicality? She wondered. Perhaps both. That night, Clara found her bedroom door harder to bar. Her fingers fumbled with the iron rod, and she stood for a moment with her forehead pressed against the wood. Through her window, she could see the lantern glow in the barn again. Tomorrow he would go, and her life would return to its careful rhythms. She tried not to think about why that thought brought relief tinged with something that felt dangerously like regret. The next morning brought the sound of an axe on wood, steady and rhythmic. Clara dressed and began her daily chores, trying to ignore the figure working at her woodpile. But her eyes kept straying to the window. Elias had stripped to his undershirt despite the morning chill, and she could see the play of muscle across his back as he worked. More scars there, long, pale lines that spoke of violence survived. By midday, he had split enough wood to see her through 2 months, not just one. The pile stood neat and tall, properly stacked to shed rain. He also repaired the handle on her water pump and mended the gate that had been hanging crooked since spring. Clara brought him lunch, beans and cornbread, setting it on the same stump as before. This time, though, she didn't immediately retreat. "That's more than we agreed," she said, gesturing to the woodpile. He paused in his work, wiping sweat from his brow. "Winter comes hard in these parts. Figured it couldn't hurt to be prepared. You know these parts well." "I've traveled through, here and there." She recognized the evasion, but didn't press. Everyone in the territories had things they didn't talk about. Instead, She surprised herself again. There's a mare in the back pasture. Belonged to my husband. She's not much to look at, but she's sturdy. You could make town by nightfall. Elias set down the axe carefully. That's a generous offer. Mrs. Whitmore. It's practical. You need a horse. I don't need two. And if your horse goes lame, then I'll manage. I always do. He studied her for a moment, and she felt exposed under that steady gaze. I'll buy her from you. Fair price. With what money? You arrived with nothing but the clothes on your back. I'll send payment when I reach California. You have my word. Clara almost laughed at that. A drifter's promise was worth less than sand. But something in his expression stopped her, a dignity that their circumstances couldn't diminish. Keep your money. Consider it payment for the work. That evening, she watched him catch and saddle the mare, speaking to her in low, soothing tones. The horse, skittish with strangers since Walter's death, gentled under his touch. Clara felt an odd pang in her chest watching them. He led the mare to the front of the house where Clara waited on the porch, maintaining her careful distance. I'm grateful for everything, Mrs. Whitmore, he said. The shelter, the doctrine, the horse, the kindness. It wasn't kindness, it was Christian duty. If you say so, ma'am. That ghost smile appeared again. Either way, I won't forget it. He mounted carefully, favoring his injured arm. The mare shifted but settled under his weight. He touched his hat brim one last time and turned toward the road. Mr. Vane, Clara heard herself call out. He paused, looking back. California's a long way for a man alone. Yes, ma'am, it is. You'll want to follow the southern trail through Apache Pass. Water there, if you know where to look. His expression softened. Thank you. I'll remember that. She watched him ride away until he was just a speck against the desert horizon, then went inside and barred all the doors. The house felt different somehow, emptier than it had before his arrival. The chair where he'd sat that first night seemed to hold his presence still. Clara shook off such fanciful thoughts and set about making supper for one. But that night, for the first time in months, she forgot to count herself to sleep. 2 weeks passed before Clara heard the news. She was in Holbrook's general store, purchasing flour and salt, when Martha Holbrook leaned across the counter with the eager expression of someone bearing gossip. Did you hear about that drifter who helped fix the Jacobsons' wagon wheel? Tall fellow, dark hair, real polite-like. Clara's hand stilled on her coin purse. No, I hadn't heard. Well, Reverend Pike says he recognized him from a wanted notice out of Arizona. Elias Vane, escaped convict. Can you imagine? Walking among decent folks like he belonged? The coins scattered across the counter as Clara's fingers trembled. She gathered them quickly, hoping Martha hadn't noticed. What? What was he convicted of? Martha's eyes gleamed with the thrill of scandal. Murder, they say. Killed a prison guard during his escape. Reverend Pike sent word to the federal marshal over in Prescott. Clara managed to complete her purchase and load her supplies, but her mind churned as she drove the wagon home. A murderer. She had sheltered a murderer, fed him at her table, given him Walter's horse. The thought should have terrified her, should have vindicated every cautious instinct she'd developed. Instead, she remembered the careful way he'd worked, the gentleness with which he'd handled the mare, the shadow of old pain in his eyes. Killers came in many forms. She knew that better than most. But Elias Vane hadn't felt dangerous. Not in the way Walter had been dangerous, with his sudden rages and cruel hands. That night, nightmares dragged her from sleep. Not the usual dreams of Walter's final moments, but new terrors. Elias Vane standing trial, swinging from a gallows. Federal marshals breaking down her door. She woke, gasping, her nightgown soaked with sweat. The fear followed her through the next days. Every rider on the horizon might be a lawman come to question her about harboring a fugitive. She found herself checking the locks more frequently, starting at unexpected sounds. The very fears Elias's presence should have triggered during his stay now haunted her in his absence. A week later, She was drawing water from the well when movement near the barn caught her eye. Her heart hammered as she reached for the rifle she'd taken to carrying everywhere. But the figure that emerged from behind the structure wasn't a marshal. It was Elias Vane. He stood perfectly still, hands visible and empty, letting her see him clearly. His clothes were dustier, his face gaunter, but it was unmistakably him. "Evening, Mrs. Whitmore," he said quietly. "I apologize for startling you." Clara kept the rifle trained on him, though her hands shook. "What are you doing here? The whole territory's looking for you." "I know. That's why I came back." "Are you mad? They'll hang you." "Maybe, but I couldn't leave without explaining. You showed me kindness, and I repaid it with lies. You're a killer." The words came out flat, accusatory. His expression didn't change. "Yes, ma'am, I killed a man, but not the way they're telling it. Dead is dead, Mr. Vane." "That it is." He took a slow step forward, stopping when she raised the rifle higher. His name was Sergeant Horace Bramwell. He ran the work detail at Yuma Prison, had a fondness for the whip and other things that killed men slower than any bullet. Clara found herself listening despite her better judgment. There was no pleading in his voice, just a tired recitation of facts. There was a boy, couldn't have been more than 17, caught stealing food for his sick mother. Bramwell took a special interest in him. 3 days later, the boy was dead. The warden called it heat stroke. The rifle grew heavy in Clara's arms. She knew about men who enjoyed causing pain, who used their power like a weapon. Walter had been such a man, though his cruelties had been private, hidden behind the closed doors of marriage. When I complained, Bramwell had me flogged, 40 lashes, said I needed to learn my place. Elias's hand went unconsciously to his back, where she'd seen those scars. Week later, he started in on another young prisoner. I couldn't watch it happen again. "So you killed him?" "I did. Broke his neck with my chains during work detail. Knew what it meant. Murder of a guard is hanging a fence. But in that moment, I didn't care. Still don't regret it. God help me." Clara lowered the rifle slowly. "Why come back here? Why tell me this?" "Because you deserve the truth, and because—" He paused, seeming to search for words. "Because for 2 days, I remembered what it felt like to be treated like a human being. That's a debt I couldn't leave unpaid." "There's no debt. You worked for your keep." "It wasn't about the work, ma'am. It was about the way you looked at me. Cautious, yes, but not like I was an animal. Do you know how long it's been since someone offered me a seat at their table?" The question hung between them in the gathering dusk. Clara thought of her own isolation, the careful walls she'd built. When had someone last looked at her as more than the widow Whitmore, the woman with secrets? "You need to leave," she said quietly. "The marshal could come any day." "I know. I wanted you to hear it from me, what I did and why. So you'd know you didn't shelter a monster. All killers think they have reasons, Mr. Vane." "That they do." He touched his hat brim in that familiar gesture. "I'll be going now. Thank you for listening." He turned to go, and Clara saw the exhaustion in his movements. His clothes were torn in places, his boots worn through. He'd been running, hiding, probably barely eating. "Wait," she heard herself say. He paused but didn't turn back. "There's food in the root cellar. Take what you need." "Mrs. Whitmore. Just take it and go. Quickly." She went inside without watching him leave, barring the door and leaning against it. Through the window, she could see him emerge from the cellar with a small bundle. He looked toward the house once, then melted into the darkness. Clara didn't sleep that night. She sat in her kitchen, rifle across her lap, thinking about justice and mercy, about the different kinds of violence men did to each other, about a prison guard who tortured boys and a convict who stopped him, about her own hands, and what they'd done in desperation. Morning brought Reverend Pike to her door, accompanied by a federal marshal with hard eyes and a harder mouth. "Mrs. Whitmore." The Reverend began, his tone unctuous with false concern. We're here about the escaped convict, Elias Vane. We have reports he was seen in this area." "I haven't seen any strangers," Clara said evenly. The marshal pushed past her into the house, his gaze taking in every detail. "You live alone out here, ma'am?" "I do." "Dangerous for a woman alone, especially with killers roaming about." "I manage." He studied her with the calculating look of a man used to finding lies. "See, we tracked him to the Jacobson place, where he helped with a wagon. Then the trail goes cold. But a woman alone might not want to admit if a dangerous man had been here. Might be too frightened." "I'm not frightened. Marshal?" "And I haven't seen your convict?" He walked through her small house, examining everything. In the kitchen, his eyes fell on the 2 chairs at the table. "You often have company for meals?" "Occasionally. Christian charity demands we be ready to feed the hungry." "Indeed it does," Reverend Pike interjected, "though we must be careful not to aid those who would do evil." The marshal's examination eventually led outside. He studied the freshly split wood, the repaired barn door, the mended fence. His expression grew more suspicious with each improvement he noticed. "Lot of work for a woman alone," he commented. "I'm stronger than I look. Marshal, I'm sure you are." He turned to face her fully. "Here's what I think. Mrs. Whitmore, I think Vane was here. I think you fed him, maybe doctored his wounds. Maybe you didn't know who he was. But if you're protecting him now, that makes you an accomplice to murder." Clara met his gaze steadily. "I've told you, Marshal—" "I haven't seen any strangers." They stared at each other for a long moment before the marshal finally stepped back. "We'll be staying in town for a few days. If your memory improves, you come find me. Otherwise, if I discover you've lied to me—" He left the thread unfinished, touching his hat mockingly before mounting his horse. Reverend Pike lingered, his expression a mix of disappointment and suspicion. "Clara, my dear, I hope you understand the gravity of the situation. This man is dangerous. If he returns—" "He won't," Clara said firmly. "Good day, Reverend." She watched them ride away, then sank into her porch chair, suddenly exhausted. She had lied to a federal marshal, committed a crime that could see her imprisoned. For a killer. For a man she barely knew. But she thought of Bramwell, the guard who'd tortured boys for pleasure. Thought of Walter, whose cruelties had been perfectly legal within the bonds of marriage. Thought of justice, and how rarely it aligned with law. That night, she left her bedroom door unbarred for the first time in months. Not because she expected anyone, but because the lock suddenly seemed pointless. The real dangers in life rarely announced themselves with knocks on doors. They smiled and spoke of God's will, wore badges and wedding rings, came cloaked in respectability and law. Sometimes, she was beginning to understand, the only real safety lay in choosing which chances to take. The days following the marshal's visit passed in uneasy quiet. Clara went through her routines, tending the garden, feeding the chickens, mending what needed mending, but her thoughts kept returning to Elias Vane. Where was he now? Had he made it past the marshal's net? She found herself watching the horizon more often, though whether hoping to see him or fearing his return, she couldn't say. 2 weeks later, she made her monthly trip to town for supplies. The moment she entered Holbrook's store, she sensed the shift in atmosphere. Conversations paused, eyes followed her movements. Martha Holbrook served her with pursed lips and minimal words. Even old Samuel, who usually helped load her wagon, found urgent business elsewhere. "Heard that convict was spotted near Cottonwood," Martha finally said, unable to resist sharing gossip even with someone she now viewed with suspicion. "Marshal's heading that way. Good riddance, I say." Clara merely nodded, paid for her goods, and left. But as she drove her wagon past the church, Reverend Pike emerged, flagging her down. "Mrs. Whitmore, a moment of your time." She reined in the horse, waiting. "I'm concerned about you, my dear. Living alone, so far from town. Perhaps you should consider moving closer to civilization, for your own safety. My land is my home, Reverend." "Yes, but a woman alone. It invites speculation, especially after recent events." Clara's hands tightened on the reins. Are you suggesting something, Reverend? Not at all, but others talk. They wonder how you manage so well on your own. They remember how sudden your husband's passing was. There it was, the old suspicion finally voiced. Clara had known it existed, whispered in corners, but hearing it stated so boldly made her stomach turn. My husband died in an accident, she said evenly. The horse kicked him. You performed the service yourself. Indeed I did, and I pray his soul found peace. His eyes were cold despite his pious words. I merely suggest that a woman who wishes to avoid further gossip might benefit from the protection of town life, or perhaps remarriage. Thomas Garrett has expressed interest. Good day, Reverend. She drove away before he could continue, but his words followed her home. The vultures were circling, sensing weakness. Thomas Garrett was a widower with grabbing hands and whiskey breath who'd been sniffing around since Walter's funeral. The thought of his protection made her skin crawl. That night, unable to sleep, Clara sat on her porch watching the stars. The desert stretched endlessly before her, beautiful and merciless. This land didn't care about gossip or propriety. It judged only by strength and will to survive. A sound made her reach for her rifle. Footsteps, careful but not stealthy. A figure emerged from the darkness, and her heart recognized him before her eyes could confirm it. Thought you'd be long gone, she said, not lowering the weapon. Elias stepped into the moonlight. He looked worse than before, thinner, a fevered brightness to his eyes. Made it almost to the border. Then I heard talk in a saloon. About you. Oh. Marshall's been spreading word that you might have helped me. Some folks are saying worse things. About your husband. Clara's jaw tightened. That's not your concern. It is if I brought it on you. People have been whispering about Walter's death long before you arrived. Let them talk. He moved closer, and she could see the exhaustion written in every line of his body. When's the last time you ate? She found herself asking. Day before yesterday, maybe longer. Against every shred of common sense, she stood. Come inside. Mrs. Whitmore? Clara, she said, surprising them both. Just come inside before you fall over. She led him to the kitchen, gestured to the chair, his chair. She caught herself thinking, while she heated leftover stew. He sat silent, his presence filling the small room, when she set the bowl before him. His hands shook slightly as he picked up the spoon. Slowly, she advised. You'll make yourself sick otherwise. He ate with careful control, and she busied herself making coffee to avoid watching him too closely. But awareness of him prickled along her skin, his height, the breadth of his shoulders, the way his hair fell across his forehead. Why did you really come back? She asked when he'd finished. He wrapped his hands around the coffee mug, seeming to draw warmth from it. Started thinking about what that reverend might do. Men like that, they're dangerous when they think a woman's vulnerable. I can handle Reverend Pike. What about Thomas Garrett? Heard his name mentioned too. Man who thinks he's owed something. Clara's expression must have shown her disgust, because Elias nodded grimly. That's what I figured. You helped me, and now you're paying for it. I told you, the gossip isn't new. Walter was not well liked. When he died, people wondered. But they couldn't prove anything. And I'm still here. How did he die? The question hung between them. Clara had never spoken of it to anyone, had buried the truth deeper than Walter's body. But something about the darkness, about this man who understood violence and desperation, made the words come. He was drunk, angry about something, the meal, the weather, my breathing. Didn't matter what. He came at me in the barn, backed me against the wall, said he was going to teach me a lesson I'd never forget. Her voice was steady, almost detached. The pitchfork was right there. When he grabbed me, I just reacted. He was so surprised, fell backward into the stall. The horses were already spooked by his yelling. The horse kicked him. Elias said it wasn't a question. After, he was already down, but the mare, she remembered all the times he'd beaten her. Her hooves made sure he couldn't get up again. Silence settled over the kitchen. Clara waited for judgment, condemnation. Instead, Elias reached across the table, his fingers stopping just short of her hand. "You survived," he said simply. "That's all that matters." She looked at his hand, so close to hers, watched her own fingers move until they touched his. The contact sent lightning through her, and she jerked back. "I should go," he said softly. "Yes." Neither moved. "Clara," her name on his lips was a caress. "I need to tell you something. These past weeks, running, hiding, all I could think about was this kitchen, you, the way you looked at me like I was just a man, not a convict or a killer. You barely know me. I know you're strong, brave. I know you understand what it means to do what's necessary to survive. I know looking at you makes me want things I have no right to want." Clara's breath caught. It had been so long since anyone had looked at her with desire rather than calculation. So long since she'd felt anything but fear at a man's interest. "What things?" The question escaped before wisdom could stop it. His eyes darkened. "A life, a home, someone to protect who might actually want my protection. Foolish things for a man with a noose waiting for him." "Then why torment yourself? Why come back?" "Because I'm selfish. Because if I'm going to hang, I wanted to see you once more. To pretend, just for a moment, that I could be the kind of man who deserved to sit at your table." Clara stood abruptly, needing distance from the intensity in his eyes. She moved to the window, staring out at the darkness. "You should leave. The marshal is tracking me toward Mexico. I made sure of it." She heard him stand, felt him move closer, not touching, but near enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "That night in the barn," he said quietly, "I barely slept. Kept thinking about you in the house, wondering what kind of man your husband had been to make you so careful. Wishing I could tell you not all men are like that. Aren't they?" The bitterness in her voice surprised her. "Some are. Too many. But not all." She turned to face him, back pressed against the window. He was close. So close she could see the gold flecks in his green eyes, the scar through his left eyebrow. "What are you like, Elias Vane?" "Broken," he said honestly. "Violent when I need to be. Haunted by things I've done and seen. But I'd never hurt you, Clara. Never raise a hand to you or any woman. I'd die first." Pretty words. True ones. He lifted his hand slowly, telegraphing the movement, and touched her cheek with infinite gentleness. "You're shaking." "I'm not afraid." "Liar." She was afraid, terrified. Not of him, but of the want uncoiling in her belly, of the way she leaned into his touch despite herself. "This is madness," she whispered. "Yes. You're leaving. You have to leave." "Yes." But his thumb stroked her cheekbone, and she closed her eyes. How long since she'd been touched with tenderness? Had she ever? "Clara," her name was a prayer. "Tell me to go." She opened her eyes, met his gaze, saw her own hunger reflected there. Instead of words, she turned her face, pressing her lips to his palm. His breath caught, slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. He lowered his head. The first brush of his lips against hers was so gentle she might have imagined it. The second was firmer. Asking permission she found herself granting. The kiss deepened, and Clara felt something crack open inside her. A door she'd barred for so long she'd forgotten what lay behind it. Want, need, the possibility of pleasure rather than pain. When they broke apart, both breathing hard. Elias rested his forehead against hers. "I should go. Stay." The word escaped without her permission. "Just tonight. Please." He pulled back to study her face. "Clara, I know what I'm asking. What I'm risking, I don't care. I'm tired of being careful. Tired of being alone. Just once. I want to choose. I want to feel alive. You deserve better than a fugitive who can't offer you tomorrow. I'm not asking for tomorrow. I'm asking for tonight." He cupped her face in both hands, thumbs stroking her cheeks. "Are you sure?" Instead of answering, she took his hand and led him to her bedroom. The door that had been barred for so long stood open. Inside, moonlight painted silver squares on the floor. Clara's hands trembled as she reached for the buttons of her dress. Elias caught them, stilling her movements. "Let me," he said softly. "If you change your mind, tell me, any moment, tell me and I'll stop." She nodded, unable to speak. His fingers were patient with the buttons, gentle as they pushed the fabric from her shoulders. When she stood before him in her chemise, shivering despite the warmth, he simply looked at her. "Beautiful," he murmured. "So beautiful." Walter had never called her beautiful, had never looked at her with anything but possession or anger. The reverence in Elias's eyes made her want to weep. He shed his own clothes with less ceremony, and she saw all the scars, the lattice of whip marks, the puckered bullet wound, the various nicks and cuts of a hard life. But his hands were gentle as they drew her close, his lips soft as they found hers again. They moved to the bed slowly, learning each other with careful touches. Clara tensed when he rose over her, memory and instinct warring with desire, but Elias saw, understood. He rolled them until she straddled his waist, putting her in control. "Your choice," he said. "Always your choice." And it was. For the first time in her life, every touch, every kiss, every movement was her choice. When they finally joined, it was with her setting the pace, him watching her face with wonder. Afterward, they lay entwined, Clara's head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. His fingers combed through her hair, now loose around her shoulders. "I love you," he said quietly. "I know I have no right, but I do." She lifted her head to look at him. "How can you love someone you've known for such a short time?" "How can I not? You're everything I never dared hope for." Clara laid her head back down, not ready to examine her own feelings. Love was too dangerous a word, too large a risk, but she held him tighter, storing up the moment against the loneliness to come. They dozed fitfully, waking to touch and whisper and make love again with increasing urgency as dawn approached. When the first light appeared on the horizon, Elias stirred. "I have to go." "I know." They dressed in silence, the weight of parting heavy between them. At the door, Elias pulled something from his pocket, a small folding knife with encarved bone handle. "I made this years ago, before prison. Carried it all this time." He pressed it into her hand. "Something to remember me by." Clara turned it over, finding words etched in the handle. "Strength in solitude. I'll change it," he said. "When I come back." To something about not being alone anymore. Don't make promises you can't keep. He kissed her one last time, fierce and desperate. "I'll find a way. Clara, somehow. I'll come back to you." Then he was gone, swallowed by the desert and the rising sun. Clara stood in her doorway, the knife clutched in her hand, watching until there was nothing to see but empty land and endless sky. That night, she left her bedroom door open, not from fear or habit, but from choice. She'd found her strength, claimed her freedom. Whatever came next, she would face it as herself, not as Walter's widow or the town's curiosity, but as Clara Whitmore, who had loved a fugitive and chosen joy over safety, if only for one night. The knife lay on her nightstand, its message a reminder and a promise. She was strong in solitude. Yes, but maybe, someday, she wouldn't have to be alone. The weeks following Elias's departure brought unexpected changes to Clara's life. The fear and caution that had governed her days began to loosen their grip. She found herself humming while she worked, planting marigolds alongside her vegetables, even exchanging pleasantries with neighbors when necessity took her to town. The knife Elias had given her stayed always in her pocket, its weight a comfort and reminder. But change, Clara learned, could be dangerous for a woman who'd stepped outside society's narrow boundaries. Thomas Garrett appeared at her gate on a Tuesday afternoon, dressed in his Sunday best despite the heat. Clara saw him coming from her kitchen window and briefly considered barring the door. Instead, she stepped onto the porch, rifle prominently displayed against the railing. "Mr. Garrett," she said coolly. "What brings you out this way?" He removed his hat, revealing hair slicked with too much pomade. "Mrs. Whitmore, I've come to discuss a matter of mutual benefit. I can't imagine what that might be. Your situation, ma'am. A woman alone, trying to run a homestead. It ain't natural, ain't safe. His eyes roamed over her property with proprietary interest. I'm prepared to make you an offer. Marriage. I'll take on this land. Give you protection and respectability. I have no interest in remarrying. Mr. Garrett. His face darkened. Now, don't be hasty. You've got a reputation to think about. People are talking, especially after that business with the convict. Let them talk. That's prideful thinking. Clara. He used her given name without permission, stepping closer. A woman needs a man's guidance. Your husband understood that. My husband is dead. Yes, and some say you had a hand in that. His voice turned sly. But I'm willing to overlook such talk. Marry me, and all that gossip disappears. Clara's hand moved to her pocket, feeling the knife's handle. And if I refuse? Well, then people might start asking harder questions about Walter's death. Reverend Pike's already concerned about your moral standing, living alone, entertaining strange men. Get off my land, Mr. Garrett. He grabbed her wrist as she turned to go inside. Now, hold on. The knife was in her hand before thought formed, its blade pressed to the soft flesh under his chin. Garrett froze, eyes wide. I said, get off my land, Clara repeated, her voice steady as her hand. Don't come back. Don't speak to me again. If you spread any more lies about me, I'll tell everyone about your visits to the Mexican whorehouses. Yes, I know about those. Walter used to go with you. She pressed the blade just enough to dimple the skin. Do we understand each other? Garrett nodded frantically. When she stepped back, he scrambled for his horse, cursing under his breath. As he rode away, Clara knew she'd made an enemy, but the fear she'd expected didn't come. Instead, she felt a fierce satisfaction. She'd defended herself, her home, her choices. That evening, she wrote in the journal she'd started keeping, I am changing. The woman who locked her doors in fear feels like a stranger now. He gave me more than a knife. He gave me the knowledge that I can choose, that I am worth choosing. I pray he is safe, wherever he is. I pray he thinks of me as I think of him. Constantly, with a sweet ache that makes me feel alive. The next morning brought a federal marshal to her door, not the same one as before, but an older man with kind eyes and a weary expression. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm Marshal Coleman. I need to ask you about Elias Vane. Clara's heart clenched, but she kept her expression neutral. I've already spoken to a marshal about this matter. Yes, Marshal Briggs. He's been recalled to Denver. Some irregularities in his methods. Coleman studied her thoughtfully. I'm more interested in understanding the man than capturing him. If you take my meaning, I don't know what you mean. He sighed, removing his hat. Ma'am, I've been doing this job for 20 years. I've hunted truly evil men, killers who enjoyed it, thieves who'd steal from orphans. Vane doesn't fit the pattern, so I did some investigating. Clara remained silent, but her grip on the doorframe tightened. Sergeant Bramwell had 11 prisoner deaths under his watch, 11 accidents and suicides. The warden looked the other way because Bramwell kept the others in line through fear, until Vane. Why are you telling me this? Because I think Vane was here. I think you helped him, and I think you're the kind of woman who wouldn't help a man unless you saw good in him. Coleman replaced his hat. I'll keep hunting because it's my job, but maybe I won't hunt too hard. Maybe I'll focus on the really dangerous men instead. After he left, Clara sank into her porch chair, shaking. A lawman who questioned the law, a small mercy in a harsh world. Life settled into new rhythms. Clara threw herself into improving her homestead, using skills Elias had shown her. She repaired the chicken coop, reinforced the root cellar, even started building a small addition to the house. The physical labor felt good, made her strong. 3 months after Elias left, she woke one morning violently ill. The sickness passed, but returned the next day and the next. When her monthly bleeding didn't come, she knew. Terror and wonder warred in her chest. A child, Elias's child, in her marriage to Walter. She'd been grateful for her barren state. Bringing a child into that hell would have been cruel. But now... She placed a hand on her still flat stomach, remembering Elias's gentle touch. A piece of him grew within her. Whatever happened, she wouldn't be alone anymore. The pregnancy changed everything. She couldn't hide it long in a small town. The gossip would be vicious. An unwed mother, for she was unwed in the eyes of those who mattered. Whatever her feelings, would be shunned, possibly driven out. Her child would be branded a bastard. But as Clara sat in her kitchen, knife on the table before her, she felt not despair but determination. She'd survived Walter. She'd chosen love with Elias. She would choose this child, protect it, give it the life she'd never had. She began planning. She could sell the homestead, move somewhere nobody knew her, claim to be a widow, true enough, start fresh. But first, she had something to do. That Sunday, she attended church for the first time in months. The congregation's whispers followed her to a back pew, but she held her head high. Reverend Pike's sermon dealt with fallen women and the wages of sin, his eyes finding her repeatedly. When the service ended, Clara didn't file out with the others. She walked to the front, where Pike was gathering his papers. "Reverend," she said loudly enough for lingering parishioners to hear, "a word about Christian charity." He looked up, discomfort flickering across his face. "Mrs. Whitmore, how unexpected. You speak often of sin," she continued. "But what of mercy? What of 'let he who is without sin cast the first stone'? Some sins cry out for judgment, like bearing false witness." Clara's voice carried clearly. "Like a minister who skims from the collection plate to pay gambling debts in Tucson?" Pike went white. "I don't know what you mean." "Don't you? Walter kept excellent records. He knew everyone's secrets. I found them after he died." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Leave me alone. Reverend, stop poisoning the town against me, or everyone will know exactly where their donations have been going." She turned and walked out, feeling the eyes of the town on her. Let them look. Let them whisper. She had weapons now, knowledge, courage, and the fierce love for the child growing within her. That night, she dreamed of Elias. He was walking through a field of wildflowers, turning back to smile at her. In her dream, her belly was round with child, and his eyes lit up when he saw. She woke with tears on her cheeks and his name on her lips. A month later, as autumn touched the desert with cooler nights, Clara was drawing water when she heard horses approaching. Multiple riders, moving fast. Her hand went to the rifle, but relaxed when she recognized the lead rider, Marshal Coleman. "Mrs. Whitmore," he called out, dismounting. "I need your help." Behind him, slumped in the saddle and tied to prevent falling, was a figure that made her heart stop. "Elias. Found him half dead outside Prescott," Coleman said quickly. "Gunshot wound. Infected. Doctor there couldn't do much, and the prison doctor would just let him die slow." He met Clara's eyes. "Figured you might know someone who could help, unofficially." Clara was already moving, reaching for Elias as the deputies lowered him from the horse. His face was gray, eyes closed, breath shallow. The wound in his side leaked through dirty bandages. "Bring him inside," she ordered, her mind racing. "You," she pointed at a deputy. "Ride to the old Paiute camp. Find Joseph Windrider. Tell him Clara needs him. You to another. Get clean water boiling." They carried Elias to her bed, the same bed where they'd loved each other. Clara cut away his shirt, revealing the angry wound. Infection had set in, red streaks spreading from the entry point. "Will you save him just to see him hang?" she asked Coleman bitterly. The marshal was quiet for a moment. "Funny thing, my prisoner transfer papers got damaged in a flash flood. Can't quite make out the name or description. Might take weeks to get new ones from Yuma." Clara looked up at him, hope warring with suspicion. "I had a son once," Coleman said quietly. "About the age of that boy Bramwell killed. Sometimes justice ain't what's written in law books." Joseph Windrider arrived within the hour. the old healer taking in the situation with knowing eyes. He'd doctored plenty of men who couldn't go to town physicians. "I need my supplies," he told Clara in his mix of English and Paiute. "And you must help. This will be a long fight." For 3 days and nights, Clara barely left Elias's side. She bathed his fever-hot skin, dripped water between his cracked lips, held him when delirium made him thrash. Joseph's herbs fought the infection while Clara fought despair. On the 3rd night, as she dozed in the chair beside the bed, a hand touched hers. She jerked awake to find Elias watching her, eyes clear for the first time. "Clara," he whispered. She couldn't speak through her tears, could only grip his hand and press it to her cheek. "Thought I dreamed you," he continued weakly. "Angel in the desert. Hush, save your strength." But his eyes had found hers with that intensity she remembered. "Couldn't die, not without seeing you again, telling you." "I know," she said softly. "Rest now. I'm here. You're safe." He slept then, but it was healing sleep, not the restless unconsciousness of fever. Clara finally allowed herself to hope. Marshal Coleman returned the next day to find his prisoner conscious and Clara feeding him broth. "Well," the marshal said, "this is awkward. See, I can't seem to find my prisoner. Just some unnamed fellow recovering from wounds. Don't suppose you've seen an escaped convict around here?" Elias tried to sit up, but Clara pushed him down. Coleman held up a hand. "Now, this unnamed fellow might want to consider California. Heard there's good work in the lumber camps up north. Man could start fresh there, maybe send for anyone he left behind once he's settled." The marshal set a packet on the table. "Found these papers in the flood, too. Birth certificate, identification papers, name smudged but might read, Elijah Vale? Could be useful for someone starting over." He touched his hat to Clara. "Ma'am, I'll be heading back to Prescott now. Doubt I'll have reason to come this way again." After he left, Clara and Elias sat in stunned silence. A second chance. A miracle in the desert. "California," Elias said finally. "You need to heal first. Weeks, maybe months. You could come with me." Clara took his hand, placed it on her still flat stomach. "We could come with you." His eyes widened, understanding dawning. "Clara, are you—" "Yes." The joy on his face was like sunrise. He pulled her down for a kiss that tasted of tears and promises. "Marry me," he said against her lips. "Not legal, maybe, but real, in our hearts, before God and the sky." "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." That evening, Joseph Windrider performed a ceremony in the Paiute tradition, binding them under the stars. Clara wore her mother's blue dress, saved all these years. Elias stood straight despite his weakness, his eyes never leaving hers. They were married in truth, if not in law, bound by love and choice and the new life growing between them. That night, lying carefully beside him in their bed, Clara felt the locks around her heart fall away completely. She was no longer Walter's widow, the town's curiosity, the woman who lived in fear. She was Clara Vane, beloved and loving, carrying hope beneath her heart. The future stretched before them uncertain, but no longer alone. And in the darkness, as Elias slept with one hand protective over her belly, Clara smiled. She'd locked her bedroom door for so long. Now it stood open, welcoming love, welcoming life, welcoming the dawn of a new day. The morning sun cast long shadows across the desert as Clara stood in the doorway, watching Elias pack the few supplies they could spare for his journey. His wound had healed enough for travel, though she could see the careful way he moved, favoring his right side. 6 weeks of recovery had returned some color to his face, but the urgency of departure hung heavy between them. "I should come with you," she said for the 3rd time that morning. Elias turned from checking his saddlebags, crossing to her in 3 strides. His hands framed her face with that gentleness she'd come to cherish. "We've discussed this. The journey's too dangerous in your condition. Once I find work, get us a place, I know." She leaned into his touch. The thought of you leaving again. This is different." He rested his forehead against hers. This time, I'm not running away. I'm running toward something. Toward our future. Clara's hand moved to her belly, now showing the earliest signs of the life within. How long? 2 months, maybe 3. I'll send word as soon as I'm settled. Then money for your journey. Joseph will look after you. And Marshal Coleman said he'd check in when he can. She pulled back to study his face, memorizing every line. Thomas Garrett won't give up easily. Yesterday, Mrs. Morrison wouldn't sell me flour, said her husband forbade her from dealing with my kind. Elias's jaw tightened. If that bastard comes near you, I can handle him. I've handled worse. She touched the knife at her belt, then reached up to smooth the anger from his face. Don't make me a widow before we're even properly married. Promise me you'll be careful. I promise, and you promise me the same. Any trouble at all. You go to Joseph, or sell everything and come to California. Don't wait for word from me if things get dangerous. They held each other in the doorway, neither willing to be the first to let go. Finally. Elias stepped back, his hands sliding down her arms to grasp her fingers. There's something I need to give you. He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a folded paper. Marshal Coleman did more than provide new identity papers. This is a deed transfer. The Hobson place, that abandoned homestead 5 miles north? It's in your name now. Clara Vale. Clara stared at the document. How? Coleman knew old Hobson. Man died with no heirs. Property was going to tax auction. The marshal arranged for you to take possession. Said it was payment for nursing a wounded man. Elias's smile was crooked. If anyone asks, you're my widow, married in Kansas before coming west. Your husband died of fever on the trail. A new story for a new life. Clara murmured. The baby will have a name, legal protection. And if something happens to me, nothing will happen to you. She said it fiercely, as if words could make it true. He kissed her then, deep and desperate, pouring promises into the contact. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. I love you, he said simply. Both of you, remember that. Come back to us, she whispered. That's all I ask. One last kiss, quick and hard. And then he was mounting the horse. Clara watched him ride away until the desert heat wave swallowed him whole. Only then did she allow her tears to fall. The first week passed quietly. Clara threw herself into planning the move to the Hobson place. It was smaller than her current homestead, but closer to Joseph's camp and further from town. Distance from gossiping tongues seemed wise. She was packing Walter's old books when hoofbeats announced a visitor. Through the window, she saw Thomas Garrett approaching with 2 other men she didn't recognize, hard-faced men who wore their guns low and easy. Clara checked the load in her rifle before stepping onto the porch. Mr. Garrett, I told you not to come here again. Now, Clara, that's no way to greet your future husband. His smile was all teeth and threat. I've been patient, given you time to come to your senses, but my patience is wearing thin. Then you'll have to find some more. I'm not marrying you or anyone else. See, that's where you're wrong. He dismounted, his hired men flanking him. Reverend Pike and Judge Morrison have concerns about your moral welfare. An unwed woman, living alone, carrying on with convicted killers. Why, it's downright scandalous. Clara's finger found the trigger guard. Get to your point. The point is, you need protection, my protection. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to pack your things and come with me. We'll be married tonight, all legal and proper. I'll raise that bastard you're carrying as my own. Generous man that I am. You're insane. No, I'm practical. See, Judge Morrison's prepared to declare you mentally incompetent, hysterical female. Undone by her husband's death, I'll be appointed your guardian. Either way, this land becomes mine. But I'd rather have a willing wife than a ward. One of his men shifted, hand moving toward his gun. Clara swung the rifle to cover him. Try it, please. Now, Garrett said, still smiling. No need for violence. Though, if you insist, he nodded to his men. Jake here served with Quantrill's raiders. Real good at convincing reluctant women. Tom's got a gentler touch, but the results are the same. Clara's blood turned to ice. She knew what he was threatening. Could see it in the hungry way his men looked at her. "Here's my counteroffer," she said, proud when her voice didn't shake. "You leave now. You forget I exist, or I'll kill you where you stand." Garrett laughed. "You might get one of us, maybe even two, but not all three." The shot came from behind Clara, the bullet kicking up dust at Garrett's feet. Joseph Windrider stepped from behind the corner of the house, his ancient Springfield rifle already reloading. "She gets two," the old Paiute said calmly. "I get one. Want to gamble which?" Garrett's face went pale, then flushed with rage, but he was a coward at heart, and the odds had shifted. "This isn't over," he snarled. "Yes, it is." Clara kept her rifle steady. "Joseph, how many of your people are watching from the hills?" Joseph smiled. "A rare sight." "Enough. My nephew particularly wants to meet the man who threatens women with rape. He has opinions about such men." The hired guns were already backing toward their horses. Garrett held his ground a moment longer, hatred twisting his features. "You'll regret this, both of you. I'll see you run out of the territory." "Try it," Clara said softly. "But remember, I've already killed one man who thought he owned me. I won't hesitate to make it two." They watched the three men ride away. Only when they were specks in the distance did Clara lower her rifle. Her hands shook as reaction set in. "Thank you," she said to Joseph. "Elias asked me to watch over you. Besides," his weathered face creased in what might have been amusement, "you helped my grandson when the town doctor wouldn't. Debts must be balanced." That night, Clara made a decision. She couldn't wait for word from Elias, couldn't risk Garrett making good on his threats. Come morning, she would pack what she could carry and leave, but morning brought a different threat entirely. She woke to the smell of smoke. Racing to the window, she saw flames licking at her barn. As she watched in horror, a second fire bloomed near the chicken coop. Garrett. It had to be. Clara dressed quickly, grabbing the essentials she'd already packed: money, papers, the few precious mementos she couldn't bear to lose. The knife Elias had given her went into her boot. His pistol, left behind for her protection, went into her belt. By the time she made it outside, the barn was fully engulfed, her chickens scattered in panic, and she could hear the milk cow bellowing in fear. She managed to free the animals, driving them away from the flames, but there was no saving the structures. Mrs. Whitmore. She spun to find young Timothy Parsons from town riding hard toward her. The boy was breathless, his horse lathered. "Mrs. Whitmore, you gotta run. Mister, Garrett's got Judge Morrison to sign commitment papers. They're coming with the sheriff to take you to the asylum. My ma heard and sent me to warn you." The asylum, where inconvenient women were locked away, subjected to treatments that broke minds and spirits, where she'd disappear, and her baby would be taken, given to proper families. When? They're gathering at the church, maybe an hour behind me. Clara's mind raced. She couldn't fight the law, corrupt as it was, but she could run. "Timothy, you tell your mother thank you. Now get home. You were never here." The boy nodded and wheeled his horse around. Clara ran for the root cellar, where she'd hidden her traveling money. The house would burn too. She realized Garrett would leave her nothing to return to. Let it burn. Let the whole life she'd built with Walter turn to ash. She was Clara Vale now, and Clara Vale had somewhere to go. She saddled her gentlest mare, tied on her packed bags. One last look at the homestead, the garden she'd tended, the house where she'd found both imprisonment and freedom. Smoke was already curling from the roof. "Goodbye," she whispered, then turned the horse toward the mountains. She rode hard but carefully, mindful of the child she carried. Joseph would have seen the smoke, would know what it meant. He'd find her on the trail. She hoped. If not, she knew the way to the first water station. From there, she could catch a stage west. The sun was high when she heard pursuit. multiple horses riding fast. Clara left the trail, guiding her mare into a narrow canyon she'd discovered years ago while searching for a lost goat. The passage was barely wide enough for a horse, invisible from the main trail. She dismounted, hand over the mare's nose to keep her quiet. The thunder of hooves grew louder. Through a gap in the rocks, she glimpsed them. Sheriff Watson, Garrett, 4 other men, all armed. "Trail goes cold here," she heard Watson saying. "Could have gone any direction. She's carrying a bastard." Garrett snarled. "She can't have gotten far. Spread out." They dispersed, but none thought to check the narrow canyon. Clara waited, counting her heartbeats, until the sounds faded. Then she waited longer, remembering Elias's patience, his careful approach to survival. When she finally emerged, the sun was beginning its descent. She followed game trails now, harder to track. Her back ached and her throat was parched, but she pressed on. Near sunset, a figure materialized from the rocks. Clara's hand went to her pistol, then relaxed. "Joseph, leading a pack mule. Thought you might need supplies," he said simply. The smoke was visible for miles. "They burned it all." "Yes, but you're alive. The child is alive. That's what matters." He'd brought water, food, ammunition, and something else, a letter, worn from travel. "Came yesterday," Joseph said. "I was going to bring it today anyway." Clara's hands trembled as she recognized Elias's handwriting. She tore it open, drinking in his words. "My dearest Clara, I write this from Eureka, California. The journey was harder than expected, but I've found work at Henderson's mill. The owner is a fair man who doesn't ask about the past. I've secured a small cabin, just 2 rooms, but clean and private. The town is growing, needs seamstresses and teachers. You would like it here. I've enclosed money for your journey. Take the Southern Pacific route. It's safer. I'll meet every train until you arrive. The mountains here remind me of you, beautiful and strong. I dream of you nightly. Wake calling your name. Tell our child I love them already. Forever yours, Elijah Vale." Tears blurred Clara's vision. He was safe. He was waiting. They had a future. "He sent money?" Joseph asked practically. Clara checked the envelope, finding bills carefully folded inside, enough for train fare and more. "Then we should get you to the railroad," Joseph said. "My nephew will guide you. Garrett won't follow onto Paiute land." They traveled through the night. Joseph's nephew, a silent young man named Robert, leading them through paths no white man knew. By dawn, they'd reached the edge of Paiute territory. In the distance, Clara could see the town of Flagstaff and the railroad depot. "This is where we part," Joseph said. "You've been a good neighbor. Clara Vale, may you find peace in your new land. I can never repay your kindness. Live well. Be happy. That's payment enough." Robert escorted her to the depot, waiting until she'd purchased her ticket before disappearing back into the desert. Clara sat on a bench, ticket clutched in her hand, watching the horizon for the train that would carry her to her new life. She thought of all she was leaving, the graves she'd never visit again, the land she'd worked, the woman she'd been. But grief was tempered by hope. Somewhere in California, Elias waited. Their child grew strong within her. The past was ashes, but from ashes, new things grew. When the train whistle sounded in the distance, Clara stood. She was no longer the frightened woman who'd barred her bedroom door against the world. She was Clara Vale, choosing her path, walking toward love with open eyes and willing heart. The train pulled in with a squeal of brakes and burst of steam. Clara climbed aboard, finding a seat by the window. As the train began to move, she watched the desert roll by, harsh and beautiful, unforgiving and free. "Goodbye," she whispered to it all, to Walter's ghost, to her old fears, to the woman she'd been. The conductor came by to check tickets. "Traveling alone, ma'am?" "Yes," Clara said, hand protective over her belly. "But I won't be alone when I arrive." The train journey took 3 days, each mile carrying Clara further from her past and closer to an uncertain future. She dozed fitfully in her seat, one hand always on her small bag of belonging, the other protective over her growing belly. Other passengers gave her curious glances, a woman traveling alone, obviously with child, wearing a faded dress and dust-worn boots. She met their stares with quiet dignity, offering no explanations. At each stop, she searched the platforms for familiar faces, half expecting Garrett to appear with lawmen in tow. But the only pursuers were her own fears, and those grew quieter as California drew near. When the conductor finally called out, "Eureka! Next stop, Eureka!" Clara's heart began to race. She pressed her face to the window, watching the landscape transform from desert to forest. Towering redwoods lined the tracks, their ancient presence both humbling and reassuring. This was a different world, green and alive where Nevada had been brown and harsh. The train wheezed to a stop at a modest wooden depot, through the steam and bustle of disembarking passengers. Clara searched for him. Then, there, standing apart from the crowd, hat in hand, scanning each window with desperate hope, Elias. He was thinner than she remembered. His clothes those of a working man, sturdy canvas pants, a clean but mended shirt. But his eyes were the same, that desert sage green that had haunted her dreams. Their gazes met through the glass, and his whole body sagged with relief. Clara gathered her meager belongings and made her way through the crowded aisle, her legs unsteady after days of sitting. When she stepped onto the platform, Elias was there. They stood frozen for a heartbeat, drinking each other in. Then she was in his arms. He crushed her against his chest, his face buried in her hair, her name a broken prayer on his lips. "Clara, my Clara, you're here, you're real." She couldn't speak through her tears, could only hold him and breathe him in, sawdust and soap and that essential scent that was purely Elias. When they finally pulled apart, his hands framed her face, thumbs wiping away her tears. Then his gaze dropped to the obvious swell of her belly, and fresh wonder dawned in his eyes. "Look at you," he whispered, one hand moving reverently to rest on the curve. "Both of you. We're here," Clara managed. "We made it. Come," he said, gathering her bag. "Let's go home." Home proved to be a small cabin on the outskirts of town, nestled among younger redwoods. It was simple, just 2 rooms as he'd written, but clean and well-maintained. Window boxes held the beginnings of a garden, and a rocking chair sat on the small porch. "I made that," Elias said shyly, gesturing to the chair. "Thought you might like it, for later, when the baby comes." Clara touched the smooth wood, imagining herself rocking their child while Elias worked nearby. It's perfect. Inside, she found he'd tried to make the space welcoming. Wildflowers in a mason jar on the table, new curtains at the windows, a bed with a quilt that looked store-bought rather than homemade. "I know it's not much. It's everything," Clara interrupted. "It's ours. That makes it everything." They came together again, holding each other in the middle of their small home, when kisses grew heated. Elias pulled back, glancing meaningfully at her belly. "Is it? Can we?" Despite everything, Clara found herself blushing. The midwife in Flagstaff said it was safe for a while yet. "If we're careful, I'm always careful with you," he murmured, leading her to the bed. They made love slowly, rediscovering each other with gentle touches and whispered endearments. Afterwards, they lay entwined. Elias's hand splayed possessively over her belly. "Tell me what happened," he said quietly. "Your letter only said you had to leave quickly." Clara told him about Garrett, the threats, the fire. She felt him tense with fury when she described the hired men and their implications. "I should go back. Kill him." "No." She turned in his arms to face him. "That life is done. We're Elijah and Clara Vale now. The past can't follow us here." "But what he did to you? He failed. I'm here. We're safe. That's all that matters." He studied her face, then nodded slowly. "You're right. The thought of you in danger while I was here. Joseph helped me. And I helped myself. I'm stronger than I was. Elias, you taught me that. You were always strong. You just needed to remember it." They talked through the night, sharing the weeks of separation. Elias had found steady work at the mill, earned the respect of his fellow workers. The owner, Henderson, was a fair man who judged by deed rather than history. There was talk of making Elias a crew supervisor come spring. "And I've been teaching some of the men their letters," he added. "In the evenings, Henderson pays me extra for it." Clara heard the pride in his voice and understood. After years of being seen as nothing but a convict, he was building a reputation as a man of worth. "What about you?" he asked. "What will you do here?" "I thought I might take in sewing or washing, something I can do with a baby." "The school needs a teacher," Elias said carefully. "The old one married and moved to San Francisco. They've been making do with volunteers, but I'm not qualified. You can read and write and figure. That's more than most. And you're patient, kind." He smiled. "I may have mentioned to Henderson that my wife was educated." Wife. The word warmed her even as reality intruded. "We're not legally married. If anyone investigated, then we'll fix that." Elias sat up, pulling her with him. "There's a justice of the peace in Fortuna, the next town over. We'll go tomorrow. Make it legal. But your name, the papers Coleman gave you, are good enough for a marriage license?" "I checked." Clara felt tears threaten again. After so long living outside society's boundaries, the thought of legal recognition, of true legitimacy for their child, overwhelmed her. "Hey," Elias said softly, tilting her chin up. "What's wrong?" "Nothing. Everything. I never thought I'd have this, a real marriage, a chosen one. You deserve everything. Clara, a home, a family, respect, safety. I'll give you all of it or die trying." "Just give me you," she whispered. "That's all I need." They were married 3 days later in a simple ceremony at the Fortuna courthouse. Clara wore a new dress, blue like her mother's, but simpler, suited to her new life. Elias had trimmed his hair and borrowed a proper coat. The justice's wife and clerk served as witnesses. "Do you, Clara Whitmore, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do." The words came strong and clear. This was her choice, freely made, when the justice pronounced them man and wife. Elias kissed her with a tenderness that made the clerk's wife sniffle. Clara felt something settle in her chest, a last piece clicking into place. She was Clara Vale, legal and true. Their child would have a name, a father, a chance. The following weeks passed in a blur of adjustment. Clara learned the rhythms of their new life. Elias leaving for the mill at dawn, returning at dusk tired but satisfied. She took in mending from the other mill workers' wives, building connections slowly but steadily. The women were cautiously friendly once they learned she was married to the man teaching their husbands to read, Mrs. Patterson. The foreman's wife was particularly kind, sharing advice about the local midwife and which merchants gave fair prices. "You're not what I expected," Mrs. Patterson confided one afternoon over tea. "When Elijah first arrived, there were rumors, a man alone, no talk of family, scars like that. We wondered, what changed your mind? The way he worked, never complained, never made trouble. And the teaching, my Robert's proud as a peacock, now he can write his name. A bad man doesn't have that kind of patience." Clara thought of Elias helping the mill workers form their letters, the same gentle patience he'd shown fixing her barn. "No," she agreed. "He doesn't." Her pregnancy progressed, and with it came a peace she'd never known. She woke each morning in Elias's arms, ate breakfast at their small table, tended her growing garden. In the evenings, she'd sit in the rocking chair while he read aloud, newspapers when they could afford them, borrowed books when they couldn't. One night, as autumn began to turn the leaves, Elias set aside the book and knelt before her chair. From his pocket, he withdrew her knife, the one he'd given her so long ago. "I promised I'd change this," he said, producing a small carving tool. "If you'll let me." Clara handed him the knife, watching as he carefully worked the bone handle. When he finished, she held it to the lamplight to read the new inscription. "Never alone, always chosen. It's perfect, she whispered, blinking back tears. You saved me, Elias said simply. In every way a person can be saved. The least I could do was keep my promise. Their child came with the first snow, arriving after hours of labor that left Clara exhausted but exhilarated. A daughter, small but strong, with her father's green eyes and her mother's determined chin. What shall we name her? Clara asked. The baby nestled between them in the bed. Hope, Elias said immediately. Hope Clara Vale, for what she represents. Clara touched their daughter's downy hair, marveling at the perfection of tiny fingers and toes. Hope. She agreed. They were a family now, complete and whole. The past was a distant country, its borders closed. Here in their small cabin, with snow falling soft outside and their daughter sleeping peaceful between them. They had found their happy ending, but life, Clara had learned, rarely tied things up so neatly. The letter came in spring, just as the wildflowers began to bloom. Clara recognized the handwriting, Joseph Windrider. Careful letters learned late in life. My friend, the letter began. I write with news both good and bad. Thomas Garrett is dead, shot by a card sharp in Tucson. The town speaks of justice finally served. But there is more. Your husband's brother has come from Missouri, claiming inheritance of the land. He knows nothing of you, and I thought it best not to enlighten him. The past is buried. Let it rest. Live well in your new world. The desert remembers you kindly. Clara read the letter twice, then handed it to Elias. He read in silence, jaw tightening. Garrett's dead, she said, testing the words. Good. His response was flat, final. And Walter's brother? Can have the ashes. I want nothing from that life. Elias pulled her close, hope babbling between them. Are you sure? The land might be worth something. I have everything of worth right here. She gestured to their small home, their daughter, him. Besides, I'm not Clara Whitmore. Never really was. I'm Clara Vale, teacher, wife, mother. That other woman is a ghost. He kissed her forehead. Then we let the ghosts lie. That evening, Clara burned Joseph's letter, watching the smoke curl up into the darkening sky. Somewhere far to the east, the desert waited with its secrets and silence. But here, in the green heart of California, life bloomed rich and full. She thought of the woman she'd been, frightened, locked behind doors of her own making. That woman had been necessary for survival, but she was needed no longer. In her place stood Clara Vale, who chose love over fear, hope over certainty. Elias found her there, hope in his arms. What are you thinking? About locks? Clara said, how I used to need them, how I don't anymore. Everyone needs some locks, he said gently, just not against the people who love them. She took their daughter, feeling the comfortable weight of the child. Hope grabbed at her mother's hair, laughing at some baby joke only she understood. You're right, Clara agreed. But I choose my locks now, and more importantly, I choose when to open them. They went inside together, their small family complete. The door closed behind them, not barred, not locked, just closed against the evening chill. Inside was warmth and light and the promise of tomorrow. Clara had locked her bedroom door once, but love had found a way in anyway. Now, with that love beside her and new life in her arms, she finally understood. The strongest doors are the ones we choose to open, and she would spend the rest of her days choosing to let love in over and over again. 5 years had passed since Clara stepped off that train in Eureka. 5 years of building a life from hope and determination. Their cabin had grown. 2 rooms became 4, with a proper kitchen and a small room where Hope, now a spirited child with her father's green eyes, slept surrounded by rag dolls Clara had sewn. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen window as Clara prepared breakfast. Hope chattering at the table about the frog she'd found near the creek. Elias sat beside her, trying to braid her wild hair while she squirmed. Hold still, little frog, he said, laughing as she wiggled away. "Your mother will have my hide if I send you to school looking like a wild thing." "I am wild," Hope declared, making what she clearly believed was a fearsome face. Clara smiled at them, her heart full. She'd been teaching at the school for 3 years now, and Hope would start attending in the fall. The town had accepted them completely. The mysterious past that clung to so many frontier dwellers had faded into irrelevance against years of honest work and community service. A knock at the door interrupted their morning routine. Elias answered, returning with an envelope that made Clara's blood chill. "Federal Marshal's office," he said quietly, his face grave, with trembling fingers. Clara opened the letter. Inside, Marshal Coleman's familiar handwriting. "Mrs. Vale, I hope this finds you well. I write with news that may concern you. A bounty hunter named Jake Harlan has been asking questions about a woman who helped a certain escaped convict some years back. He seems particularly interested in any woman who left Nevada suddenly around that time. I've told him nothing, but thought you should know. Some stones refuse to stay unturned. Your friend, P. Coleman." Clara passed the letter to Elias, watching his face darken as he read. "After all this time," he murmured. "Mama, what's wrong?" Hope asked, picking up on the sudden tension. "Nothing. Sweetheart, finish your breakfast." Clara forced a smile. "Papa needs to get to work." But Elias didn't move toward the door. Instead, he pulled Clara aside, speaking low. "We could run again, head north to Oregon, maybe Canada." "No." Clara's voice was firm. "We've built a life here. Hope has friends, school. You have your position at the mill. We're not running. If this Harlan finds us, then we'll face him. Together. I won't live in fear again. Elias. Not even for you." He studied her face, then nodded slowly. "You're right. We stand our ground." 3 weeks passed in watchful waiting. Clara taught her students, tended her garden, loved her family, but always with an ear cocked for unfamiliar hoofbeats. Elias had quietly spread word among the mill workers. Strangers asking questions should be noted, reported. The confrontation came on a Sunday afternoon. Clara was hanging laundry while Hope played with her dolls on the porch. Elias was inside, working on lessons for the men he tutored. The sound of horses made Clara look up to see 3 riders approaching. The lead rider was lean and weathered, with the calculating eyes of a man who hunted humans for profit. Jake Harlan, she presumed. His companions looked cut from similar cloth, hard men with ready guns. "Help you, gentlemen?" Clara asked, keeping her voice steady. "Looking for someone," Harlan said, dismounting with practiced ease. "Woman who might have passed through here 5, 6 years back. Would have been alone, maybe with child. Lots of folks passed through Eureka. This one was particular. Helped a murdering convict named Elias Vane. There's still bounty on anyone who aided his escape." Hope had gone quiet on the porch, her child's instincts recognizing danger. Clara saw her slip inside. "Good girl." "Can't help you," Clara said. "I've only been here 2 years myself." Harlan smiled, cold and knowing. "Funny thing, records show a Clara Vale's been teaching school here for 3 years. And before that, nothing. Like you sprouted from the ground. Many people come west to start over, Mr. Harlan. And yes, they do. But not many match the description of a certain widow from Mercy's Hollow who disappeared right around the time Vane was spotted there." Clara heard the door open behind her, felt rather than saw Elias step onto the porch. She didn't turn, didn't react, though her heart raced. "Problem here?" Elias asked mildly. "No problem," Harlan said, his eyes sharp. "Just asking your wife some questions. You're Elijah Vale." "I am." "Been in Eureka long?" 5 years. Thereabouts." "Interesting. Same time that convict Vane dropped off the map." Harlan's hand rested on his pistol. "You wouldn't happen to know anything about that?" "Can't say I do." Elias moved closer to Clara. "But I know you're on my property uninvited. Time you moved along. Public matter. Vale. Or should I say vain? The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Clara saw Harlan's companions tense, ready for violence. In the doorway, Hope's face appeared, eyes wide with fear. "You're mistaken," a new voice said. Everyone turned to see Henderson, the mill owner, riding up with several workers, good men who'd learned their letters at Elias's kitchen table. "Elijah's been with me 5 years," Henderson continued, dismounting. "I hired him straight off the railroad crew. Have the papers to prove it." "Papers can be forged," Harlan said, but uncertainty flickered in his eyes. "Maybe so," said Patterson, the foreman, moving to flank Elias. "But I know this man. Taught my boy to read. Helped rebuild the church after the fire. You're barking up the wrong tree." More townspeople appeared. Mrs. Patterson with several women from the sewing circle. The pastor. Even the taciturn blacksmith. They formed a loose circle. Not threatening, but clearly protective. "This is a federal matter," Harlan warned. "Interfering with a bounty hunter in pursuit?" "Of what?" Clara stepped forward, finding her voice. "A family man who works hard and serves his community. My husband is Elijah Vale. We were married in Fortuna 5 years past. Our daughter was born here. This is our home." "Easy enough to check," Harlan said. "Marriage records, birth certificates. Check all you like." Clara said, "You'll find everything in order." Harlan's eyes narrowed. He knew. She could see it. But knowing and proving were different things, especially with the whole town standing witness. "If I find out you're lying—" "You won't," Elias said simply. "Because we're not." Long moments passed, tension thick as summer honey. Finally, Harlan stepped back. "This isn't over," he said. "I'll be checking those records, asking more questions. Ask all you want." Henderson said, "You'll get the same answers. Now get off this property before I fetch the sheriff." Harlan mounted his horse, his companions following suit, but before riding off, he locked eyes with Clara. "Vane killed a man," he said. "That's not something that just goes away." "No," Clara agreed. "But sometimes justice has already been served, just not in ways the law recognizes." He studied her a moment longer, then wheeled his horse around and rode away. As the crowd dispersed, neighbors offering quiet words of support, Clara felt her knees go weak. Elias caught her, holding her tight. "Thank you," he said to Henderson, to Patterson, to all who'd stood with them. "No thanks needed." Henderson replied, "You're one of us. We protect our own." Later, after Hope was asleep and the house secured, Clara and Elias sat on their porch watching the stars. "He'll be back," Elias said. "Maybe, but he'll find nothing." Coleman made sure of that. "The town, I never expected—" "You earned their loyalty," Clara said. "With every lesson taught, every kindness shown. This is what community means. I don't deserve it. Yes, you do." She took his hand. "We both do. We've paid for our past in blood and tears and fear. No more. What if— No, what ifs." Clara turned to face him. "We've built something good here, something real. I won't let anyone take that from us." The next morning brought unexpected news. Mrs. Patterson arrived breathless, eyes bright with gossip. "That Harlan fellow," she panted. "Sheriff found him at the saloon last night, drunk as a lord. Started a fight, pulled a knife. Sheriff locked him up, and when they searched him, found wanted papers from Oregon. Seems he's wanted for claim jumping and assault up north." Clara felt a wild urge to laugh. "So the hunter becomes the hunted." "Sheriff's holding him for the federal marshal. Could be weeks before anyone comes for him." Sure enough, Jake Harlan spent 3 weeks in Eureka's small jail, during which time various citizens made sure to mention, loudly and often, what a fine, upstanding man Elijah Vale was. How his wife Clara taught their children with patience and skill. How their daughter Hope was bright as a button and kind to boot. When the federal marshal finally arrived to collect Harlan, it was Coleman himself, older and grayer but with the same knowing eyes. He stopped by the schoolhouse where Clara was teaching, waiting until the children were dismissed. "Mrs. Vale," he said, touching his hat. "You're looking well. Marshal Coleman, I heard you were in town. Brief visit, just collecting some trash. He studied her, then smiled. Funny thing about Harlan, seems he got confused, started claiming all sorts of wild things. Mixed up his facts something terrible, even insisted Elijah Vale was someone else entirely. How strange, Clara said evenly. Indeed. Good thing I keep excellent records. Was able to confirm that Elias Vane died in Mexico 7 years ago. Bar fight, very tragic. Clara's breath caught. Is that so? Absolutely. Have the death certificate and everything? Mexican authorities were very thorough. Coleman moved toward the door, then paused. Give my regards to your husband. Tell him Paul Coleman's debts are paid in full. I will. Thank you. No, Mrs. Vale, thank you for proving that sometimes mercy serves justice better than law. After he left, Clara sat in her empty classroom and wept. Tears of relief, of joy, of final freedom. The past was dead. Officially and completely, they were safe. That evening, she found Elias in his workshop, building a new bookshelf for the school. She told him about Coleman's visit, watched the weight of years lift from his shoulders. It's over, he said wonderingly. Truly over. Yes, we're free. He pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she might disappear. I love you, he whispered. God, how I love you. Show me, she whispered back. Later, as they lay entwined in their bed, Hope's gentle snoring drifting from the next room. Clara reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From locked doors and loaded guns to open hearts and community protection, it seemed like someone else's life. What are you thinking? Elias asked, tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. About fear. How I used to let it rule me. Lock me in. You were protecting yourself. Yes, but I was also hiding from life, from possibility. She turned in his arms. You changed that. We changed each other. He corrected. I was just existing before you, running, fighting, surviving. You taught me how to live. We taught each other. She echoed. Hope cried out in her sleep, a brief nightmare, and Clara rose to check on her. She found their daughter twisted in her blankets, small face troubled. Clara smoothed her hair, humming the lullaby her own mother had sung so long ago. Hope settled, sighing back into peaceful dreams, standing there in the moonlight, watching her child sleep safe and loved. Clara felt the last of her old fears dissolve. This was what she'd fought for, what they'd built together, a place where nightmares were soothed with songs, where love was stronger than law, where the past held no power over the future. Elias appeared in the doorway, and Clara moved into his arms. Together they watched their daughter sleep, their hearts full of the simple miracle of an ordinary life. No more running, Elias whispered. No more hiding. Clara agreed. Just living, just loving. They returned to their bed, leaving doors open to catch the night breeze and hear Hope if she called out. No locks, no bars, no weapons close at hand. Just trust in the life they'd chosen and the community that had chosen them in return. As Clara drifted toward sleep, she thought of that frightened woman in Nevada who'd barred her door against the world. That woman had been necessary once, but she was needed no longer. In her place lay Clara Vale, teacher, wife, mother, friend. A woman who'd learned that the only locks worth maintaining were the ones that kept love in, not the ones that kept life out. The desert moon shone somewhere far to the east, lighting empty places and buried secrets. But here in Eureka, surrounded by redwoods and wrapped in her husband's arms, Clara had found her true home, not in a place, but in the choice to be vulnerable, to trust, to love without reservation. She'd locked her bedroom door once upon a time. Now she left it open to all of life's possibilities. And in that openness, she'd found everything she'd never dared dream of. Safety, joy, passion, family, community. The story that had begun with a desperate woman and a wounded stranger had become something neither could have imagined. A testament to the transformative power of choosing love over fear, trust over suspicion, community over isolation, as sleep finally claimed her. Clara smiled. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new ordinary miracles. But tonight, she was exactly where she belonged, in the arms of a man who'd seen her at her most guarded and loved her into openness, in a home built on second chances, in a life that proved sometimes the most dangerous thing you could do was also the most necessary. Open the door and let love in. Thank you for listening to this story from the Wild West. I hope Clara and Elias's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine. Where are you listening from today? Please comment below and let me know. I love connecting with listeners from around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about this tale of love, redemption, and the courage to choose hope over fear. Until next time, partners.